Audio Lecture 5, Early Pregnancy Loss, Ectopic Pregnancy, and Recurrent Pregnancy Loss. This lecture is based on the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, or ACOG, Practice Bulletin on Early Pregnancy Loss, the ACOG Practice Bulletin on Tubal Ectopic Pregnancy, NOVAC Chapter 32 on Early Pregnancy Loss and Ectopic Pregnancy, NOVAC Chapter 33 on Recurrent Pregnancy Loss, and Israeli Position Paper number 214 on recurrent pregnancy loss. Let us begin with a clinical truth. Early pregnancy is biologically inefficient. Many conceptions do not become ongoing pregnancies. Some fail before the missed period, some fail after implantation, some implant outside the uterus. Some couples experience repeated losses. The clinician's job is to avoid two opposite errors: undertreating danger, especially ectopic pregnancy, and overtreating uncertainty, especially a potentially viable intrauterine pregnancy. That balance shapes this entire lecture. First, early pregnancy loss. Early pregnancy loss means a non-viable intrauterine pregnancy in the first trimester, often defined as within 12 weeks and 6 days. It may be an empty gestational sac or a gestational sac with an embryo or fetus without cardiac activity. The most common cause is fetal chromosomal abnormality, especially aneuploidy. ACOG states that about 50% of early pregnancy losses are due to fetal chromosomal abnormalities. NOVAC emphasizes that fetal aneuploidy is the most common cause of first trimester miscarriage, and recurrent pregnancy loss literature suggests at least 60% of preclinical and early clinical losses are due to de novo fetal aneuploidy. This is not just a statistic, it is a counseling principle. Most isolated early losses are not caused by something the patient did. They are usually the result of embryonic chromosomal error and biologic selection. The risk rises with maternal age. Clinically recognized early pregnancy loss increases sharply after 35, and by age 45, the risk is very high. This is because meiotic non-disjunction becomes more common with oocyte age. Now, diagnosis. Symptoms such as vaginal bleeding and cramping are common in normal pregnancy, early loss, ectopic pregnancy, and molar pregnancy. Therefore, treatment should not begin until diagnosis is secure. ACOG emphasizes that treating early pregnancy loss before confirmation can interrupt a normal pregnancy, create complications, or expose an ongoing pregnancy to harmful agents. Ultrasound and serial beta human chorionic gonadotropin, spoken beta HCG, are the core tools. The diagnostic standard has become deliberately conservative. For example, thresholds for crown rump length without cardiac activity and mean sac diameter without embryo are designed to avoid false diagnosis of non-viability. The philosophy is more important than the exact numbers for this lecture. When uncertain, repeat imaging rather than intervene too soon, if the patient is stable. Management of confirmed early pregnancy loss has three main pathways: expectant, medical, and surgical. Expectant management can be effective, especially in first trimester incomplete loss. ACOG reports success in about 80% with adequate time, up to 8 weeks. It is less suitable later in pregnancy because hemorrhage risk rises. Medical management usually uses misoprostol, often with mifepristone in settings where available and indicated. It shortens time to expulsion and reduces need for surgical evacuation. Surgical management, usually suction curettage or vacuum aspiration, is appropriate for heavy bleeding, infection, hemodynamic instability, patient preference, or when rapid completion is needed. Suction is preferred over sharp curettage alone. RhD immune globulin should be considered for Rh-negative patients, especially later in the first trimester and particularly with surgical management. Pause and summarize early pregnancy loss. The first priority is diagnostic certainty. Do not treat a desired pregnancy as a loss until the ultrasound and beta HCG picture is secure. Once confirmed, expectant, medical, and surgical management are all valid,
and the choice depends on stability, infection, bleeding, timing, and patient preference.
Now, let us transition to ectopic pregnancy. Ectopic pregnancy is implantation outside the uterine cavity. More than 90% are tubal. It remains dangerous because rupture can cause hemorrhage and maternal death. ACOG notes that ectopic pregnancy accounts for about 2% of reported pregnancies, and ruptured ectopic pregnancy remains a major cause of pregnancy-related hemorrhagic mortality. The classic symptom triad from Novak is pain, amenorrhea, and vaginal bleeding. This triad is present in about half of patients and is more typical of rupture. Do not wait for the full triad. Every reproductive aged patient with abdominal pain or vaginal bleeding should have pregnancy status assessed. Risk factors include prior ectopic pregnancy, tubal damage, pelvic infection, prior tubal surgery, infertility, assisted reproduction, smoking, and age over 35. But 1/2 of patients have no known risk factor. That is the humbling part. Absence of risk factors does not exclude ectopic pregnancy. Diagnosis begins with transvaginal ultrasound and confirmation of pregnancy.
A definitive intrauterine pregnancy, meaning a gestational sac with yolk sac or embryo in the uterus, usually excludes ectopic pregnancy, except in rare heterotopic pregnancy. A definitive ectopic pregnancy is an extrauterine gestational sac with yolk sac or embryo. But most cases are not that clean initially. This brings us to pregnancy of unknown location. Pregnancy of unknown location is not a diagnosis. It is a temporary state. The pregnancy test is positive, but ultrasound does not yet show a definite intrauterine or ectopic pregnancy. Stable patients who desire pregnancy continuation should be followed with repeat ultrasound and serial beta-HCG until location and viability are clear. Now, the discriminatory zone. The discriminatory level is the beta-HCG value above which an intrauterine pregnancy should usually be visible by transvaginal ultrasound. Historically, lower values were used, but ACOG warns that the concept can be dangerous if used too aggressively. Some viable intrauterine pregnancies are not seen, even when beta-HCG is above traditional thresholds. Therefore, if the discriminatory level is used, it should be conservatively high as 3,500 milli-international units per milliliter, to avoid interrupting a desired intrauterine pregnancy. That is a high-yield exam point, but it is also a patient safety point. A single beta-HCG should not diagnose ectopic pregnancy by itself. It must be interpreted with symptoms, ultrasound, gestational age, and serial change. Serial beta-HCG patterns help. In a viable intrauterine pregnancy, beta-HCG should rise over 48 hours, but the minimal expected rise depends on the starting value. Lower starting values rise faster, higher starting values rise more slowly. Falling values suggest a failing pregnancy, but ectopic rupture can still occur at low or falling levels, so follow-up continues until resolution or diagnosis.
Now, management of ectopic pregnancy. If the patient is unstable, has signs of rupture, significant intraperitoneal bleeding, or an acute abdomen, this is surgical. Do not delay for perfect lab patterns. If the patient is stable and the ectopic is unruptured, treatment can be medical or surgical, depending on findings, patient preference, follow-up reliability, beta-HCG level, mass size, cardiac activity, and contraindications. Methotrexate is the classic medical treatment. It is a folate antagonist that inhibits rapidly dividing trophoblastic tissue. Candidates must be hemodynamically stable, with confirmed or high suspicion ectopic pregnancy, no rupture, ability to follow up, and no absolute contraindication. Absolute contraindications include intrauterine pregnancy, hemodynamic instability, ruptured ectopic pregnancy, breastfeeding, immunodeficiency, significant anemia or leukopenia or thrombocytopenia, active pulmonary disease, active peptic ulcer disease, clinically important hepatic disease, and clinically important renal dysfunction. The test answer in the guide highlights renal insufficiency.
Relative contraindications include high initial beta-HCG, commonly over 5,000, ectopic mass greater than 4 centimeters, and embryonic cardiac activity. These predict lower success, not absolute impossibility. After methotrexate, beta-HCG is followed. In the single-dose regimen, failure to fall by at least 15% from day 4 to day 7 suggests treatment failure and need for additional methotrexate or surgery. Surgery is usually laparoscopy when feasible. Salpingectomy removes the affected tube. Salpingostomy removes the ectopic pregnancy and leaves the tube. The choice depends on fertility goals, tube damage, bleeding, contralateral tube status, and recurrence risk. If salpingostomy is performed, beta-HCG must be followed because persistent trophoblast can remain. Pause and summarize ectopic pregnancy.
Think ectopic in any reproductive-aged patient with pain or bleeding. The classic triad is pain, amenorrhea, and vaginal bleeding, but it is absent in many. Do not diagnose by one beta-HCG. Use ultrasound, serial beta-HCG, symptoms, and clinical risk. Use a conservative discriminatory level, up to 3,500, if using it at all. Methotrexate is for stable, unruptured cases without contraindications, and renal dysfunction is a contraindication. Now we transition to recurrent pregnancy loss, or RPL. Recurrent pregnancy loss is emotionally devastating and biologically complex. Traditional definitions use 3 or more clinical losses, but evaluation may begin after 2 consecutive losses because the prevalence of abnormal findings is similar after 2 versus 3 losses. Novak gives the first counseling anchor. Even after recurrent losses, most patients are more likely to have a live birth in the next pregnancy than another miscarriage. That does not minimize the loss. It frames prognosis honestly. Now, etiology. The most common cause of first trimester miscarriage remains fetal aneuploidy. In recurrent loss, about 50% of couples may have no specific abnormality after evaluation. Identified categories include genetic, anatomic, endocrine, antiphospholipid syndrome, and other factors. Genetic evaluation has 2 sides. The pregnancy tissue can be tested, preferably with chromosomal microarray when available, because it does not require culture and can identify many numerical and structural abnormalities. Israeli position paper number 214 notes that chromosomal abnormalities are expected in 50 to 60% of miscarriages, mostly sporadic. The parents can be tested with karyotypes to detect balanced rearrangements, such as reciprocal or Robertsonian translocations. Novak estimates parental balance structural rearrangements in about 3 to 5% of recurrent pregnancy loss. The key concept is balance. A parent may be healthy because no genetic material is gained or lost, but gametes can be unbalanced, leading to miscarriage or affected offspring. Microarray cannot detect a balanced rearrangement in the parents because the total copy number is normal. Standard karyotype is needed. Anatomic evaluation matters because implantation requires a receptive, vascularized uterine cavity. Septum, adhesions, submucosal fibroids, polyps, and congenital anomalies can impair implantation or placentation. Novak notes that anatomic issues account for roughly 10 to 12% in many studies, and Israeli position paper number 214 states that acquired and congenital anatomic defects are found in about 15%. Evaluation can include hysterosalpingography, saline sonography, 3-dimensional ultrasound, or office hysteroscopy. The answer key flagged hysteroscopy or uterine cavity evaluation as likely highest yield if the question asks which test has high practical yield. Endocrine evaluation focuses on diabetes, thyroid disease, and prolactin. Poorly controlled diabetes increases miscarriage risk and congenital anomalies. Well-controlled diabetes does not appear to increase recurrent loss risk. Israeli position paper number 214 specifically notes the importance of hemoglobin A1C below 6% in diabetic patients. Thyroid dysfunction and hyperprolactinemia are treatable and should be sought. Now, antiphospholipid syndrome, or APS. APS is the classic treatable immunothrombotic cause of recurrent pregnancy loss. Testing includes lupus anticoagulant, anti-cardiolipin IgG and IgM, and anti-beta-2 glycoprotein 1 IgG and IgM. Diagnosis requires clinical criteria and persistent laboratory positivity. Mechanistically, antiphospholipid antibodies may interfere with trophoblast function, placentation, coagulation balance, and placental vascular integrity. Treatment usually involves low-dose aspirin and heparin in patients who meet criteria, and live birth rates improve substantially compared with untreated historical outcomes. Now, inherited thrombophilias. This is where older practice and current evidence diverge. It is biologically tempting to test factor V Leiden, prothrombin mutation, protein C, protein S, antithrombin, homocysteine, and methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase, or MTHFR. But Novak states that ACOG and the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, or ASRM, do not recommend routine inherited thrombophilias, or MTHFR screening for recurrent pregnancy loss, unless there is personal or strong family history of thrombosis. The reason is that evidence does not show consistent benefit from routine screening or anticoagulation in unexplained recurrent loss. So the memorable contrast is test for APS. Do not reflexively test inherited thrombophilias without thrombosis context. Now, treatment and follow-up. Treatment is cause-specific when a cause is found. Genetic counseling for parental rearrangements, correction of significant uterine cavity abnormalities, control of thyroid disease, prolactin, and diabetes, aspirin and heparin for APS. Progesterone may benefit selected patients with recurrent losses, but broad use remains nuanced. Immunotherapies such as paternal leukocyte immunization, broad immunosuppression, and intravenous immunoglobulin remain controversial and are not routine. Equally important is supportive care. Novak emphasizes close monitoring with beta-HCG levels and ultrasound, psychological support, and karyotypic analysis of tissue from subsequent miscarriage. This matters because uncertainty itself causes harm. Early ultrasound confirmation, clear follow-up plans, and compassionate counseling are part of therapy. Pause and summarize recurrent pregnancy loss. The practical workup is focused, not endless. Look for uterine cavity problems, parental chromosomal rearrangements, chromosomal abnormalities in pregnancy tissue, thyroid disease, diabetes, prolactin problems, and APS. Do not reflexively order inherited thrombophilia panels or MTHFR testing, unless the thrombosis history justifies it. Now, final synthesis. First, early pregnancy loss is common, and the most common cause is fetal chromosomal abnormality. Counsel with biology, not blame. Second, ectopic pregnancy is the dangerous mimic. The classic triad is pain, amenorrhea, and bleeding, but many patients do not present classically. Use ultrasound and serial beta-HCG, and be conservative with the discriminatory level. Third, methotrexate is for stable, unruptured ectopic pregnancy, when follow-up is reliable and contraindications are absent. Clinically important renal dysfunction is a contraindication. Fourth, recurrent pregnancy loss evaluation should be focused. Uterine anatomy, parental and pregnancy genetics, endocrine disease, and APS. Routine inherited thrombophilia testing is usually not supported without thrombosis history. Finally, remember the emotional frame. In early pregnancy, your precision protects desired pregnancies from premature intervention, and your vigilance protects patients from ectopic rupture. End of Lecture 5.